It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was the perfect wholesome show, and it made many of us feel like we were hanging out in the coziest living room ever. Fred Rogers was basically the king of kindness, but behind that cardigan and those sneakers, there are some weird, surprising tidbits that might blow your mind. So grab your sneakers, zip up your sweater, and get ready. Because these are the strangest facts about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood you never knew. First off, for most of his adult life, he weighed exactly 143 pounds. And that number meant a lot to him. He called it his I love you number. 1 for the letter I, 4 represents the 4 letters in love, and 3 in you. Classic Mr. Rogers, right? He turned something as ordinary as stepping on the scale into a quiet daily reminder of kindness and affection. He even talked about it in interviews, saying it wasn't a coincidence at all. He actually worked to keep that weight steady because it represented something meaningful to him. Fred was a creature of healthy habits, and he does take care of his body. His mornings started early. We're talking 5 a.m., with prayer, reflection, and letter writing. Yes, he really did write back to fans. Then he'd swim laps, which he did almost every day. He also became a vegetarian back in the 1970s after his father passed away. Later, in the 80s, he stopped eating fish too, becoming fully vegetarian. That 143 thing became so intertwined with his legacy that Pennsylvania actually celebrates 143 Day every May 23rd, the 143rd day of the year, as a little nod to his message of love and kindness. People across the state do something nice for someone else that day, in true Mr. Rogers spirit.
Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted...
Next, and this one is a lesser-known fact. Did you know that Fred Rogers was red-green colorblind? He couldn't really tell reds and greens apart, which makes his trademark colorful cardigans kind of fascinating. What looked like bright red or green on screen just looked like different shades of brown to him. There's even a funny story about him once asking a coworker to taste a bowl of soup because he couldn't tell if it was tomato, red, or pea, green. Even though he couldn't see colors the way most people do, it never held him back. In fact, he often worked closely with his production team to make sure the set looked visually inviting, not just through colors, but through shapes, contrast, and design. That attention to detail says a lot about him. He never saw his limitations as barriers, just chances to collaborate and trust others.
Jump in, and then I swim, and swim, and swim.
Remember those early morning swims we talked about? Well, here's something you might not know. Fred Rogers had a very specific routine when it came to his daily laps. Every morning, often before sunrise, he'd head over to the Pittsburgh Athletic Association, a private club not far from where he lived. And in true PAA tradition, he swam without a swimsuit. It wasn't anything scandalous. That was just how the club operated back then. For Rogers, it was simply part of the ritual. The PAA, with its old-school charm and sense of privacy, gave him space to just be. No cameras, no cardigan, no audience, just water, rhythm, and reflection. Even into his 70s, Rogers kept that routine going. It was his quiet act of self-care, a reminder that looking after your body and mind doesn't have to be loud or flashy. It just has to be consistent.
Growing inside, and when you wake up, ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such...
And speaking of routines, there's another small but iconic part of his day that became one of the most recognizable TV moments ever: his sneakers. You know the scene. He walks through the door, sings, "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood," and swaps his dress shoes for sneakers. That wasn't a style choice. It was purely practicality. The rubber soles helped him move around the set quietly, especially when he was working the puppets behind the scenes or moving between cameras. Most of the sneakers he wore were Sperry topsiders. They were simple, comfy, and easy to slip on. In fact, one of his pairs is now in the Smithsonian Museum, right alongside his iconic cardigan. And of course, because this was Mr. Rogers, even his sneakers had a story of kindness. There's a funny old blooper where the crew swapped his shoes for a much smaller pair as a prank. Instead of getting annoyed, Rogers just laughed, played along, and made everyone feel at ease. That's what made him so unique. He thought about everything, down to the sound of his footsteps and how it might affect a child watching from home. The quiet sneakers, the gentle tone, the deliberate pace, it was all intentional. He wanted his show to feel calm and safe, like a cozy space where nothing rushed or startled you. Here's another thing that really shows what kind of person Fred Rogers was. Every single day, he received somewhere between 50 and 100 letters from fans. Some were from kids who watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood religiously, others from adults who'd grown up with him and just wanted to say thanks. And believe it or not, he personally replied to each one, by hand. No form letters, no assistants signing his name for him. Just Fred, sitting down in the quiet hours of the morning, writing thoughtful, genuine responses. This was part of his daily 5 a.m. ritual. Right after prayer and before heading to the pool for his swim. He often said those letters were an extension of his neighborhood. And if someone shared something heavy, like a family problem or a personal struggle, he didn't shy away from it. He'd write back with empathy, encouragement, and that same calm understanding you saw on screen. One of his longtime assistants, Heather Arnett, once mentioned that he truly saw this correspondence as part of his calling. For him, connecting directly with people wasn't extra, it was the work. Over the years, those letters added up to thousands upon thousands of messages, each one treated with care. It's wild to think about in today's world of quick replies and emojis. Fred was handwriting full letters at dawn because he believed in the power of a sincere, personal connection.
It can be very hard when a pet you love dies. You may feel that you'll never stop being sad, that the hurt will never go away, but it will.
And that same compassion carried over into the show itself. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't afraid to talk about the tough stuff. And that's part of what made it so special. He tackled subjects that most children's shows wouldn't even go near: conflicts, loss, divorce, or even conversations about disability and death. When Robert F. Kennedy was eliminated in 1968, Rogers quickly produced a special episode to help children understand what had happened and to guide parents on how to talk about it. He wanted to make sure kids didn't feel lost or scared, but also didn't feel like their questions were being ignored. Later, in the early 1980s, he did a series of episodes about attacks. Heavy, right? It was intense enough that those episodes were later pulled from syndication, but even then, Rogers approached it gently, using puppets to explore fear and hope in a way children could understand. And when he talked about divorce in 1981, he didn't treat it like a dramatic TV plotline. He treated it like real life. He helped kids process emotions like sadness, anger, and confusion without ever telling them what they should feel. None of this happened by accident. Rogers worked closely with child psychologists and educational advisors to make sure his approach helped children build emotional resilience. He genuinely believed that children could handle serious topics, as long as adults respected their feelings and explained things with honesty and care. That's what made Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood timeless. It wasn't just entertainment, it was emotional education wrapped in kindness. Whether he was replying to a fan letter, swimming laps before dawn, or talking through a world crisis with puppets, everything he did came from the same place. A belief that empathy, honesty, and connection could make the world a little gentler.
Michael Keaton actually worked for the program. Before he was an actor, he worked on our floor crew and he ran the trolley. He was behind the scenes, and when the trolley came in front of the track or came out in the living room, it would be Michael back of the set flipping the switch, running the trolley. And he was also on the floor crew when they would put the set up or take it down. He would be one of those persons that would do that. He was a very funny man, too.
Next, before he ever put on the Batman suit or became a Hollywood leading man, Michael Keaton had a much humbler job, working behind the scenes on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Back in the early 1970s, when he was still known by his real name, Michael Douglas, he later changed it to avoid confusion with the famous actor, Keaton worked as a stagehand at WQED in Pittsburgh, where the show was filmed. His duty was everything from operating the neighborhood trolley to handling props, and occasionally popping up in costume during episodes. He even admitted to playing around on set and once jokingly hiding Fred's sneakers as a lighthearted prank. But what really stuck with him wasn't the fun, it was Rogers' kindness. Keaton has said in interviews that working for Fred Rogers left a lasting impression on him. It wasn't just a job. It was his first real experience in television, and Rogers' gentle leadership made the set a supportive, creative environment. Years later, when Keaton hosted a PBS tribute special for Rogers after his passing, you could see the genuine affection and respect in his voice. Now here's a crossover no one saw coming: Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Night of the Living Dead. Yep, horror legend George A. Romero actually got his start filming for Fred Rogers. In the late 1960s, fresh out of college and just starting his career, Romero took on one of his first professional gigs at WQED. His job? Shooting short educational films and segments for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's a fun bit of trivia that the man who would later redefine horror cinema began by filming the gentlest children's show on TV. Romero often laughed about the contrast later in life. He once mentioned that his first paid film job was helping Rogers make a segment about tonsillectomies, a far cry from zombies tearing through Pittsburgh. But he always spoke about Rogers with deep respect, calling him the sweetest man who ever lived. One of the reasons Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood felt so emotionally real and never talked down to kids was because Rogers didn't do it alone. For over 30 years, he met weekly with Dr. Margaret McFarland, a respected child psychologist and professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Their collaboration started way back in the 1950s, before Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood even existed. McFarland helped Fred understand how children experience emotions, how they interpret anger, fear, sadness, and love. Every script, every theme, and every puppet story was filtered through that lens of developmental psychology. She'd read through episodes, suggest phrasing, and help Rogers shape complex ideas into something kids could truly understand. Rogers often said that McFarland helped him see childhood from the inside out. Their partnership continued right up until her death in 1988, and her influence can be felt in nearly every frame of the show. It's why Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't just comforting. It was psychologically grounded, helping generations of kids build emotional vocabulary and resilience. There are a lot of stories about Fred Rogers being kind, but this one might be my favorite. Mostly because there were no cameras, no publicity, just pure compassion. One day, Rogers was on his way to an important meeting when he stepped into an elevator and noticed another passenger quietly crying. Instead of pretending not to notice or offering a polite nod, he stayed. He missed his meeting entirely, so he could spend nearly an hour talking to the stranger, listening, comforting, and simply being there. That moment perfectly captures who he was off camera. The same gentle soul who looked into a child's eyes through the TV screen and told them they were special just as they were. Rogers believed in being present, even for people he'd never met before. He often said that anything mentionable is manageable, meaning that when we talk about our feelings, even the painful ones, they become easier to carry. Now, even the friendliest corners of children's television have their creative disagreements. And yes, even Mr. Rogers had one. It happened with Carol Spinney, the man behind Big Bird from Sesame Street. Rogers had invited Spinney to appear on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, hoping he would show children how puppetry worked behind the scenes. But Spinney politely declined. He felt that revealing Big Bird's mechanics would break the illusion for kids who truly believed in the character's magic. Rogers respected that, but it was one of those rare moments where his educational transparency and another creator's sense of wonder didn't quite align. There were no hard feelings, though. The two shared deep respect for each other's work, and later collaborated again when Rogers made a guest appearance on Sesame Street in 1981. And of course, you can't talk about Mr. Rogers without mentioning the sweaters. Those colorful, cozy cardigans he zipped up at the start of every episode weren't picked out by a costume designer. They were knitted by his mother, Nancy McFeely Rogers. Every year, she made one by hand for each member of the family, including Fred. It was her way of showing love, a simple, personal act of care that her son later turned into an enduring television ritual. When Rogers changed into one of those sweaters on camera, it wasn't just a wardrobe change, it was like slipping into a hug from home. After his mother passed away in 1981, he never had new ones made. He continued wearing the ones she'd already knit, a quiet tribute to her that lasted through the end of the show. One of those cardigans, the red zip-up he wore most often, now sits in the Smithsonian, preserved like a piece of Americana. If there was one thing Fred Rogers stood firm on, it was this: you don't sell things to children. He believed kids should feel safe in front of a screen, not treated like miniature consumers. That conviction ran so deep that he refused to have any form of advertising or product placement on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And he didn't just talk the talk. He took that principle all the way to Congress. In 1969, Rogers testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Communications to defend funding for PBS. At the time, public television's budget was on the chopping block, and Rogers calmly, sincerely explained how his show helped children navigate emotions like anger, fear, and love. In just 6 minutes of testimony, he completely changed the room. Senator John Pastor, who started out skeptical, was visibly moved by Rogers' words, especially when Rogers recited the lyrics to one of his songs about dealing with feelings. That quiet moment helped secure $20 million in PBS funding, more than doubling what was initially proposed. It was a rare example of gentleness winning the day in Washington. The Neighborhood of Make-Believe wasn't just a cute addition to the show, it was Fred Rogers' emotional playground. Every puppet had a purpose, a personality, and a little piece of Fred inside them. What many people don't realize is that Rogers voiced and puppeteered all of those characters himself. King Friday the 13th, Daniel Striped Tiger, Lady Elaine Fairchild, X the Owl, Henrietta Pussycat, and more. 14 characters in total, each with their own quirks and emotional range. Through them, he could explore feelings that might have been harder to express directly as himself. Daniel often voiced fear or insecurity, while Lady Elaine embodied confidence and rebellion. Most of the time, those puppet voices and dialogues were done in a single take, completely improvised. Rogers used that spontaneity to keep the characters authentic and emotionally honest. For kids, it was entertainment. For Fred, it was another way to connect with their hearts.
Computers and writing, and invariably we end our little time together with a hug. I'm just so proud of all of you who have grown up with us.
After more than 30 years and nearly 900 episodes, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood came to a gentle close on August 31st, 2001. There was no dramatic farewell, no tears, no flashbacks. Just Fred, sitting in his familiar living room, looking straight into the camera and saying softly, "I'm proud of you." He didn't say goodbye. He never liked goodbyes. Instead, he focused on gratitude and growth, leaving viewers with the same quiet reassurance he'd always offered. That final episode was filmed months before Rogers was diagnosed with stomach cancer. It aired shortly after the 9/11 attacks, at a time when the world desperately needed comfort. Once again, his timing was almost spiritual. His calm presence felt like a warm hand on the shoulder of a grieving nation. Now, over the years, the internet has spun all kinds of wild rumors about Fred Rogers, the most famous being that he was secretly a Navy SEAL or a military guy covered in tattoos. As entertaining as that sounds, none of it is true. Rogers never served in the military, never had tattoos, and couldn't have been less violent if he tried. In reality, he was an ordained Presbyterian minister who went straight from college into television. The myth probably spread because people couldn't quite believe someone could be that kind, that genuine, and that calm, so the rumor mills filled in the blanks with something tougher. But honestly, Fred Rogers didn't need to be a Navy SEAL to be a hero. His quiet empathy and lifelong dedication to kindness made a far greater impact than any action movie could. And that's it. Strange facts about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood you didn't know. Which of these facts was the most shocking? Let us know in the comments section. Also, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still hums "Won't You Be My Neighbor" in the shower. See you next time, neighbor.